Well, awesome. Welcome, everybody. And if you want to, in the chat, tell us where you're from, what your connection is to Student Reporting Labs, and we'll get started. So I'm really excited to host this session, the Student Reporting Lab session on climate change and science reporting. And we have with us an amazing science journalist, Nsikan Akpan, who I had the pleasure of working with a couple of years back. He's had some changes in positions, and he's worked for, when I worked with him, it was at the PBS NewsHour, and we got to share the 6th floor of our building and get to bump into each other in the canteen, and I could hear what he was working on. And he's been great with Student Reporting Labs as a mentor and just as a sounding board for science stories and science reporting. And so Nsikan, welcome. And I'm going to pass it to you to introduce yourself and tell us about all the cool places you've worked and what you're up to now.
Yeah. So where do we want to begin? I grew up just north of Atlanta, Georgia. I ended up going to Bard College for undergrad, where I studied biology and spent summers working on all different types of research projects. One summer I actually spent fishing for eels in the tributaries of the Hudson River. And to fish for eels, it's kind of interesting. Eels have this reflex where they are drawn to very light, like electric pulses. So we would have like this wand. It kind of looked like a mop, and you would stick it in the water, and it would pulse like electricity into the water, and the eels would like slither up from the mud where they like kind of sleep during the day. And then they'd get like a little bit stunned, a little shocked, not in like a way that was like painful or dangerous to them. And then we would like measure them, and we were trying to figure out whether dams, like the walls that we put into rivers, whether dams prevent certain sized eels from being able to migrate to their like particular like breeding grounds, essentially. So that was a really cool project. After that, after I finished up at Bard, I went to Columbia University for grad school, where I got my PhD in pathobiology and molecular medicine, which is just a overly long title for saying that I studied ways to develop drugs for Alzheimer's disease and for stroke. I was like looking at like neurological disease. The brain had always been something that I had been interested in. And so it was a real privilege to be able to work with some amazing scientists. We developed something that, got patented. I don't know if it'll ever, end up in somebody's medicine cabinet, but, that was very, very cool research to do. Did that for 6 years, finished my PhD. But as I was wrapping up my PhD, I was like, I'm like not super fulfilled with only doing research. I had always sort of enjoyed communicating about science. I was kind of the person who would like just dive into some random scientific finding or discovery at a party. So I ended up transitioning into science journalism. There is a program at the University of California, Santa Cruz. It's like for 10 people per year, mostly people who have like research or scientific backgrounds, for them to transition into science communication. I learned how to write for newspapers. I learned how to do productions for video. It's really like a boot camp in science news. And so then from there, I ended up in Washington, D.C., had some internships, one with NPR, one with Science News magazine, and then ended up at the PBS NewsHour, where I co-hosted a segment called ScienceScope with some colleagues there. And from there, I went to National Geographic for a year, where I ran the COVID-19 coverage, and now I'm at WNYC, or New York Public Radio.
That's awesome. And Nsikan, I think like that's the first kind of introduction that went right into eels, and you painted a beautiful picture of what you were doing. And it was very visual. So I think that tells us something a little bit more about the way that you approach science and storytelling, and that's really cool. And we're gonna get into it in a moment. And I didn't introduce myself. I see some people that I don't know. So I'm Leah Clapman, managing editor of the PBS NewsHour, Student Reporting Labs, and NewsHour Classroom. And I started Student Reporting Labs 12 years ago. So it's been a long time, and we've done a lot of growth, and we've really expanded. So we're here today because there's a prompt on the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs Storymaker website. And if you're a part of the program, that you've seen this prompt, and it's about climate change, the climate crisis in your community. And so students are being asked to explore how climate is affecting the air and the land and the water in your community, and to find a way to tell a story about that. So we're going to hear from some students in a moment or two about their stories. And Nsikan is going to talk to you guys and give you some advice. And this is a really awesome opportunity to talk to a professional and find out more about tricks for great stories. So Nsikan, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Hot Ones, where we eat really spicy, or they eat really spicy chicken wings while they do an interview. We're not going to eat spicy chicken wings, but there's a part of that program where Sean, the host, takes a deep dive into the guest's Instagram. And so I grabbed these pictures from Instagram. And I'm wondering if there's one or two there that you could explain that. Let's start with the National Geographics that you're holding up. Tell us about what it was like to work there and the storytelling there.
Yeah, I mean, National Geographic was a really great experience. I mean, I think part of it is you're writing for an international audience. I had some stories translated into Japanese. I had some stories translated into Portuguese for the Brazilian outlet, or Nat Geo Brazil. And I think just knowing that you're reaching like that scale of people, but also having like a very, Nat Geo, like there's kind of like, oh, this is a Nat Geo story. I think like kind of like buying into that, or sort of like feeding into that process and that legacy was a lot of fun. I think also, I arrived there, they didn't have many health editors on staff. They didn't have many health reporters on staff. And I got there about 2 weeks after the first cases of COVID-19 were announced in China. And given my background, I had, my background studying disease processes, and also I had a little bit of background in studying infectious disease. They were like, hey, like, we don't know what this disease is, like, you can just cover it. Like, they're just like, you just do what you want with it. Which was it was an interesting opportunity because, I learned a lot about the coronavirus and sort of became like our topic expert into this issue that like completely reshaped society. And I think there's some analogies to what y'all are doing, with this climate change project. I think climate change, as much as it causes devastation, I think as much as it's scary, it's also a great opportunity for y'all. It's a great opportunity for storytelling. It's a great opportunity to really set the stage for how the next 50 to 100 years are gonna go. And so I think it's really, really cool that y'all are into this. That y'all are working on projects like this.
Yeah, and so the next slide has, I think it's a question. I think it's a question that we would like everyone in this group to answer in the chat. If you could just write down your answer in the chat. What makes a science or a climate crisis story compelling? So write your answers in the chat. And Nsikan, while this group is doing that, what would be your answer to what makes, let's say, a climate crisis story compelling?
Yeah, I would say three things: characters, adaptation, and scale. I think sometimes with climate change stories, we can often say like, oh, there's this much carbon dioxide in the air now, or oh, this glacier has melted like it's never melted before. But I find the climate change stories that resonate the most with me, they tend to have like really strong characters that can really guide me through what's going on. And so, yeah, I would start with characters. I think adaptation, like what I was just saying, climate change is like reshaping not only our future, but our present. And I think a lot of that is going to center on like stories of like human resilience, like stories about people being able to overcome and like really clever ways that they're doing that. So I think adaptation is a huge thing. In scale is probably the final thing. I mean, I think just the idea that over hundreds of years, we were able to completely change the chemistry of our entire atmosphere is just like, it's like mind-boggling when you try to think about it. It's like trying to think about like where the universe ends. You're like, wait, what? Like, how big is this thing? So I think ways of conveying like scale, like how many cars need to get off the road, or just how many houses need to switch to like cleaner electricity. I feel like those things I tend to gravitate towards as well.
Yeah, for sure. Those are awesome elements. And we have great answers in the chat from Matt and Zion. Matt, do you want to unmute and explain your answer?
Yeah, sure. So when you can like see like an effect that it has on certain people, you can like relate on a more personal level from like just like numbers on a paper or stuff like that. Like the human aspect, you can just relate more.
Yeah, for sure. And Zion, what about you?
Yeah, so I think what kind of makes a story is the characters ultimately. I think if you have characters that kind of intrigue the audience, the story itself becomes more interesting and they understand it better.
Yeah, for sure. Characters make a huge difference. Thanks, everyone. So Nsikan, we wanted to play a video that I think you chose as kind of illustrating, what makes a compelling science video. So let's take a look. And when we come back after the video, we'll hear a little bit about the behind the scenes. At least I'm not hearing audio. Do you guys hear audio?
6-foot swells.
Do you hear now?
I'm in a plastic pod in the middle of the ocean off Bermuda's southeast coast. This thing is smaller than a Volkswagen Beetle. As 6-foot swells toss our tiny submersible, I think, this was a terrible idea. Then suddenly, the pod tips forward. The descent begins. The rocking slowly stops as the ocean swallows us. All that's left is peace. No more emails, no claustrophobia, just the whole ocean spread in front of us in a scientific quest. ScienceScope visited Bermuda to travel hundreds of feet underwater with the privately funded Nekton mission, and to see the threats harming more than a third of the planet's coral reefs, because some coral may adapt by going deeper.
Necton is a brand new project aimed at exploring and documenting life in the deep ocean, but also showing the public what lives in deep ocean, what it does for humankind, and also what impacts humans are having on the deep sea.
The project plans to measure biodiversity and ocean chemistry at 3 sites in the Atlantic. The team uses a variety of tools, among them 2 Triton submersibles called Nemo and Nomad. They're the same type used by filmmaker and ocean explorer James Cameron. Capable of diving 1,000 feet, these mini-subs are equipped with the latest filming and scientific equipment. They'll document the vast, uncharted void that is the deep sea.
Well, at present, about 0.0001% of the deep sea has been explored by scientists like myself. Our goal is to set up a standard protocol for investigating the deep sea.
Over the course of 4 hours, we glide across huge portions of the sea floor. This is called a transect. The scientists videotape and ultimately identify as many species as possible.
On the limestone, we have coral garden habitat. The bright white corals are hydrocorals. The yellow corals are gorgonians. And the wire corals are black corals.
Oodles of fish dart back and forth in this abyss, while moray eels stick out their neon green necks from the seabed. But the team can identify species even when they're not physically around, using environmental DNA.
So you can imagine if you put your hand in a big glass of water and a few cells fall off your hand with your DNA, then we would be able to take that water and sequence it and find out that you've been there and you put your hand in the water.
The scientists collect water samples to do the same with the ocean critters, which shed cells with DNA in many forms: scales, shells,
Poop as well. Poop is a great source of DNA.
Closer to the surface, Necton conducts similar surveys by relying on research divers from Project Baseline, a global citizen science initiative. These divers film the biodiversity, but also collect physical specimens for researchers like Gretchen Goodbody Greenwood. She studies how corals migrate from shallow water into the deeper, darker mesophotic zone. Located 131 to more than 500 feet underwater, this deeper region may one day serve as a refuge for corals affected by bleaching and other threats.
Many of the anthropogenic or human-caused threats that are impacting shallow water coral reefs, such as increases in seawater temperature, increases in pollution, sedimentation, and runoff from the land, these all impact the shallow water reef more than they are impacting the mesophotic reef.
Warming waters cause coral bleaching, as seen here with mushroom coral. The coral expels its colorful symbiotic algae, which have become toxic due to the heat. This coral also expands to 340% of its size. If this event occurs too frequently, the coral won't only bleach, it'll die. All corals start as little larvae that get swept around by currents before attaching in a single spot. So Bringley, Rogers, and the Necton team use these underwater surveys and environmental DNA to see which shallow water corals can also live in the mesophotic zone, and maybe one day use this deeper ocean as a hideout.
So if you have high levels of genetic diversity across geographic range or across depth range, this would be indicative of mixing. And so the larvae are in fact migrating between zones.
So from these teeny tiny samples, her team can unlock how generations of corals have migrated. The results will clear up which coral species can migrate and which can't. Conservation scientists in the future can use this information to best protect these critical critters, maybe by preserving them in aquariums or physically transplanting them from shallow water to the mesophotic zone.
The deep ocean is the most critical frontier for humanity, and it's also the least known. Deep ocean is our beating heart. If you didn't know how healthy your heart was, wouldn't you want to know?
Until next time, I'm Nsikan Akpan, and this is ScienceScope from the PBS NewsHour.
Yay! That was so awesome, Nsikan. We weren't going to play the whole thing, but we couldn't stop it.
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch that again. What an adventure!
So there's so much to that I think that student reporters can learn from that. But tell us, watching it again from this distance, what, first of all, what went into the making of it, and what are you, watching it, kind of what do you feel is really important for young journalists to think about when they're trying to produce a story with that much information, that much visuals? You had we met people, we learned things, we did all the things. So yeah, if you could talk about sort of the backstory and what you think is really important for young journalists to learn and to think about.
Yeah, I mean, so that story was actually, I think it was my second field production, and I had pitched the idea of like, there's this mission, it's happening in Bermuda. I think we should go out there and really document like what's going on. And they're saying that we'll be able to ride in submersible, that little Volkswagen Beetle submarine that I was in. And they're like, yeah, we can do an interview underwater. When we actually got there, trying to do that interview underwater was like pretty technically difficult. There was 2 submersibles. I was in one, and the researcher was in the other. My co-creator Matt Eriks had the brilliant idea of doing it over the radio and then like syncing up the lips with the audio to make it seem like we were really talking back and forth in real time. It was a pretty impressive edit on his part. But yeah, I mean, I think the first element of that story is just adventure. Don't be afraid to go to a place, to go find people, to go talk to people, to call people up, and ask for their opinions on things. I think, somebody mentioned in the chat, and this sort of speaks to the second thing, the idea that climate change isn't only about the destruction, it's also about like the adaptation, like how things can be fixed or how things might survive. And I think that was a big part of why I wanted to cover this story, because it was a really interesting idea of, can species kind of learn to cope or like find a way to just get around the worst elements of it right now, and then come back, or can that only happen with some species and not others? Like, can we figure out which ones won't survive, and then like I said at the end, like find a way to just preserve them for a little while until we can sort of get things under control. That was a big element of it. I think another thing about ScienceScope, and also just I think with good science storytelling in general, is not trying to explain everything that goes into corals, everything that goes into the effects of climate change on the ocean, but really just like hitting on like a couple of core concepts. I think one of the core concepts there was that the idea that the ocean is split up into different zones. And like, I think if you even go back and like watch that and listen to it again, I say the word zone probably about a dozen times, but to some degree that repetition is to like help connect the viewer through the piece, like have them like travel through the piece with me. I'm trying to think of some other things that we did there.
Yeah,
we would
those are
typically
great.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I mean,
No, those are
I
great.
can talk about this all day.
Well, we definitely want to get to some student. No,
Yeah,
that's
go
fine.
ahead.
This is great. We definitely want to get to some student pitches. But right before we do that, so it sounded like you were interested in this mission. You kind of knew this is really cool. This submersible, like we can go have a really good time, and this is really cool science. But if sort of like if you were part of student reporting labs and the topic was climate change and climate crisis in your community, and you didn't really know where to start, we wrote down a couple of steps earlier from a conversation that we had, but maybe you could just talk about like step 1, step 2, step 3, but we can change these. It's not locked in stone, but how would you approach that topic to find a story?
Sure. Yeah. So say I wanted to look at well, this is a climate change topic that kind of affects everybody. How climate change is like affecting like solar panels in the area, right? Like in some areas, climate change is going to make the weather rainier. It's going to be a lot of cloud cover. You know, how is a city sort of adapting to make sure that, you know, if the solar panels are blocked off by clouds, that they have other sources of renewable energy on hand. Okay, so what I might do is I would go to like a city's, I would look through like the city's like mayoral page or sort of like the government page for the city and find out, okay, who's in charge of making decisions around like environmental protection. So in New York City, it is the Department of Environmental Protection, or who's in charge with making decisions around energy or like energy resources. And then I would try to find their contact information. You know, if they're public officials, their emails should be online, their phone number should be online. And then I would just reach out to them, email them, call them, say, hey, like I'm doing this story about this topic. Do you have 10 to 15 minutes to just chat? I think the other really good resource for local reporting or for any type of reporting is nonprofits. I think nonprofits tend to have a good read on like what's going on in their area. I know one of the pitches that we talked about is a nonprofit. And the good thing about, or one of the pitches that was submitted is a nonprofit. I think a good thing about them is that they can often point you in the direction to a lot of different characters or tell you where to go to really answer a question. I think that data, and I think if you notice in that ScienceScope segment, there's like data sort of peppered throughout it. Data can be a really good way to make an audience say like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know the problem was that big, right? You know, like talking about scale, or I didn't know that there were that many people working on this, or I didn't know that if there's more than 12 hours of cloud cover in a day, then like a solar panel can't work. You know, I think like data can be a really good way to draw people in and also to like connect thoughts. As I already said before, with research, like if you're looking at a study or if you're looking at a big research project, like don't try to explain everything. There's a lot more involved with that, with the Nekton project that we just didn't get to. Like I really just wanted to make sure that people understood like a couple of different ideas and understood those ideas well. And so, you know, there's points in that segment where I say something that's essentially echoed by what one of the scientists says like a second later. And it's just, you know, to really drive the point home so that way people will remember it. And then, yeah, step 3, pre-interviews. I think, you know, calling people, talking to people before you actually go out and, you know, put them on camera can really help. It can help you identify what questions to ask, you know, sort of like to help, to sort of like to set up the narrative or sort of like, you know, start creating the narrative that you're going to end up building in your script and in your final production. And then like, how do I decide who I'm going to interview? You know, it kind of depends on the length of the project. I think for like a, you know, a 3 to 5 minute project, I probably want 2 to 3 characters. And then to find those 2 to 3 characters, I might call 5 to 6 people, you know, and then only use like half of those people. I have a couple of rubrics that I use to like decide how many people I want to interview or how many quotes to, or how many interviewees to include in a story. And I can talk a little bit about that later, or send some tips to anybody who's interested.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. All really good advice. So the next slide is kind of a little bit about production. Maybe Nsikan, we can kind of quickly go through this and what you think are the most important elements. And then we're going to take a look at a student story pitch and talk with them. Yeah,
so I think with sound bites, for radio, I think this works, I think this works for NewsHour too, but you want a soundbite to maybe be 10 to 15 seconds. I think if a researcher ever says the word poop or anything that will kind of like get people to sit up, make a mental note or jot a note down. Like I'll often have like a notepad where I'm like scribbling down the quotes that they've said. If I'm looking at the timer on, say, the camera or on my audio recorder, I'll even jot down like the time when they said that, in the recording, because I know that I want to come back to it. So like, for instance, when the researcher said like, environmental DNA, like the water's just like the water's filled with poop and you can get DNA from it. I was like, well, I gotta get that in somehow. So yeah, be looking out for those things that will make people sit up. B-roll. Yeah, I think going into the field with a strong plan of like what you might want to get. So, we wanted to get shots of the submersibles. We wanted to get shots of the submersible pulling away from the boat. We wanted to get shots of it going down from inside. We wanted to get shots of the two submersibles looking at each other. I think we were really thinking about that plan before we even started filming. I think on the back end, a thing that can really help is a log, going through your files and putting the file names into a spreadsheet, and then just writing a little description of what's in each file can really help you later on when you're starting to put a story together. Those are sort of the big things. I think I talked a little bit about data. It is good to do a little research before you conduct your interviews, before you piece everything together, and maybe isolate a couple of really interesting data points that you might then turn into some type of chart or map or something like that. And then, just have it on screen for a little bit to describe the thing that you think is really interesting.
Yeah, those are all great things to keep in mind and ways to plan for a really successful story. So now we're going to turn to some of the student reporting labs, students who are working on pieces. And first up is going to be Zion Williams. Zion, can you tell us, well, first introduce yourself and give a quick synopsis of your story.
Hi everyone, I'm Zion Williams. So pretty much my story is going to be about teachers and how they teach about climate change in the classroom and how that affects students. That's pretty much it, how students feel about climate change, if it makes them overwhelmed, depressed, or anxious, and what teachers think they could do more when teaching about climate change.
Awesome. And Nsikan, I think you have seen Zion's pitch. So what kinds of suggestions, questions? Let's talk about the story.
Yeah, I saw the pitch and I watched the 4-minute draft that you had put together. I thought it was really good. I was going to say I want to hear more from you, Zion. I think when you tell a story, it's good to have your characters speak for themselves, but the audience often wants to hear from the storyteller too. And Ellis and Leah can send a couple of examples of ScienceScopes where you don't even see me. I'm just kind of talking in the background and there's interesting things on screen, but I'm sort of connecting the different points that the characters are making. So I was going to say that, one thing that could be good is if so for example, they both sort of bring up things around kind of Tesla and how Tesla is involved with a lot of mining, and therefore it's not the most sustainable company in the world in terms of the mass scale of electric cars. And then I remember the teacher said something about we worry about our cars, but people should also be worried about their smartphones, because like there's a lot of mining and unsustainable things that go into that. I thought that that would be a great place to hear from you, if there's like some stat that you could use to tie those things together, like Tesla's mining operations in Africa consume this X amount of energy per year, or like mining for the electronics for smartphones and for electric cars like actually consumes this much energy per year, or like is like stripping the world of rare minerals. Like I think there are opportunities within this story to hear your narration. And there was one part towards the end where you said something to kind of like tie things together, and I was just thinking that it would be great if you did that sort of like throughout the whole thing. So I think that'd be one good thing to do. Yeah, if you use, and data is a great way to do that. I call them like data rubber bands, like things that can kind of like tie everything together. And I also wonder if there's a way to, I think there's one central theme that they both touch on over and over, and that's sustainability. They both seem really, really interested in sustainability. So I would emphasize more of that, and you could probably like slice off some of the other like themes that are in this story. I think that might be one. Those would be my tips. Is that helpful? I think it's helpful. Is that helpful?
Yeah. That was very helpful. I have a quick question. So today I actually did an interview with my biology and geometry teacher, because they're in this like MST program, and they talk a lot about science, math and technology and things of that nature. And I know it sounds weird to have a geometry teacher, but he does like he shows the kids like a documentary on like climate change. And it's a little scarring because like I think about it even now, and I watched it freshman year and junior. Anyway, I was thinking of adding their perspectives in the piece as well, because they talk more about the scientific aspect of climate change, while Miss T and Jason kind of talk about like, I guess, the social aspect of climate change. You think that would be like a good thing to add into it, or should I just focus on narration and statistics?
I think if you're going to add another character, you should think about how you're going to connect them visually. So it might involve like, shooting some more B-roll, maybe of like the walk between the horticulture center to like this geometry teacher's class or something like that. Ways to kind of like, it's like if you do that, you might want to say like, here's how the teachers and students at our school are thinking about this enormous issue that's going to impact all of us. And then maybe you start with like a wide shot of the school, and then you have some B-roll where you're like kind of like walking to maybe the horticulture center first, and then you're kind of explaining like who you're about to talk to. You get there, you talk to them, and then you say like, well, it's not just people who deal with the outdoors. There's also this geometry teacher who has very interesting thoughts about it and is approaching it from like a completely different spectrum. Maybe you film the B-roll walking to that classroom. Maybe you have a shot of like the math on like a whiteboard, and then you just have a sit down with them. And then I might ask them some questions of like, how do you sort of tie math into climate change? Like, is he thinking about it in terms of like the scale question and like, just data points? Or is he thinking about it in terms of like, oh, how can we use math to like make things more efficient? Really, I find that when I talk to scientists, if you can get them to talk about what they're passionate about, it can be a really good interview. So I might even ask them a question like, why do you care? Like you're a math teacher, like why do you even really care about this? And then you might get a really evocative answer that way. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Zion, as you're working on it, if you come up with maybe I don't know, we can ask Nsikan on the spot if you check out your script when you're ready with your script and,
Sure.
and done some more of that production.
Sure,
Awesome.
sure.
No pressure.
No, it's fine. I'm just like I'm looking at scripts all day. It's fine.
So we're really excited for this story, Zion. It sounds like you're well on your way. And have you shot B-roll yet?
Okay. Yeah, I shot B-roll of the like horticulture classroom, the plants and stuff, and they were doing like a food science lab when I was there, and they were trying to figure out like how much acidity I think ketchup has, which is pretty interesting. And then in my biology class today, they were doing microscopes and they were looking at different samples, and I got all of that, and I got B-roll of my teacher teaching. And
that's awesome. And if you can, I mean, I love Nsikan's ideas, very specific ideas of B-roll that kind of match sort of an arc of a story where you're connecting them. Those are really cool ideas, Nsikan. Okay, well, next up, we're going to talk to Matt. Is Matt, are you the only one from your class who's working on the story who's here? Is there anyone else? Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'm the only one that's here.
Okay. Matt, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I'm Matt Cayley, and I'm from Royal Oak High School. And our story is about the Oakland County climate campaign. So I'm from Oakland County, and this is something that emerged in 2019 because our old county executive in Oakland County, who was sort of like a backwards thinking conservative, passed away. So now it's sort of like a new era in Oakland County for all sorts of things. So there's new developments happening. And we're sort of, we were curious about this climate campaign. We wanted to see like what's happening, what's going on. Can this make a difference in our county, or is it more just like, I guess, empty promises sort of? So we want to see, we want to know the story behind this. We want to know if this is going anywhere.
Yeah, I checked out their website, and it was pretty interesting. So are you more interested in a story about whether the idea has any legs, or are you more interested in a story about what they're doing on the ground, or like, is it a real idea? Like what kind of interest, what drew you to this campaign?
I think just because it was so new and it was so recent, we were just interested in what was going on, and we just wanted to know like what they're sort of doing. We wanted to learn more all that we could.
Yeah, I feel like if that's the case, like I would try to hunt down like the person or the group of people who launched it, and I would be like, why? Like, why'd you do it? Like, what went into launching it? Did you have to raise a bunch of funds? Did it start with like, a random conversation around a dinner table on like a Friday? Kind of like a not like an oral history, but I guess kind of like an oral history. Like, tell me about the origins of this project. And I think whenever you do like an origin story, yeah, you want to ask questions about, where's the money coming from? What are your long-term ambitions? Who's kind of the ringleader here? It sort of sounds like you might want to just do a profile of these folks. I mean, I thought they also had, it looks like, they have like these 3 bins of things that they're trying to do, right? Like something that's sort of focused around like what the government is doing. It looks like there's something kind of around environmental justice and like the legal aspects of climate change. And then there's one on jobs. The jobs angles sort of interest me the most because because like just in general, I'm really interested in how the renewable economy is going to kind of affect the future. And I also think focusing on jobs, it's an easy way to find characters. Maybe you find people who are training and learning how to make solar panels or windmills, or like there's actually like a ton of like computer science that goes behind running renewables and just running energy in general. So there's a lot of training programs, there's a lot of like mechanics, there's a lot of engineering, there's like just a ton of stuff that could be wrapped up into like a profile on what they're doing around jobs. It also looked like they're having like a climate march. So, you could always go to that and be like, hey, here's what happened at this climate march. And that can be your, sort of how I used like, we're on this boat, we're pushing off to sea. Okay, let's talk about coral. You could sort of use the climate march as a way into talking about this group and what they are and who they are. And the nice thing about covering a march is like there's just like tons of visuals, tons of sound, and then you can kind of find ways to transition into interviews with the people involved. Like maybe you interview one of the leaders at the march, so you're kind of like, hey, like, that way it's easy to transition from the march to talking about the organization and then maybe back to the march. Right now I'm kind of just throwing stuff out there. I don't know if anything's sticking. I can also stop talking. I'm just kidding.
So we were trying to set up an interview with the county executive, David Coulter. We sent I think 2 voicemails now. We called him twice. We haven't gotten any sort of response yet. We've also just today, some other people in my group interviewed people in the our high school's Student Environmental Awareness Club, SEA club. It's a new club that just started this year. So I'm not sure how that went, but I'm hoping that we got a lot of stuff there.
Can you how do we what's the position on stakeouts? Like could you recommend like they just like go to the office and be like, hey, I'm a student journalist, I want to talk to you. We don't have to talk now, but like could we like set something up?
Yeah, I was just thinking like I think we may have to like just go to the office and like see like what we can do, because if they're not gonna like return our calls, I'm guessing they can just like ignore our emails. So we gotta find a way to talk to these people, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds like a good plan. And I wonder if, Nsikan, do you think if kind of like pitching it as what you were describing as a profile, like where did this idea come from, and sort of like you want to tell the story, like, make them see that this is a good, it's a way of kind of having the story out there. What do you think?
Yeah, my go-to tactic for getting people to speak with me, especially when they're like, oh, I'm too busy, or like they don't want to speak with me, is to just like butter them up, be like, hey, like this sounds really awesome. Like, I don't need a ton of time, but like this does really seem like an interesting story. Like we want to profile it. Like we want to know what's going on. In the back end, like I might be like, well, actually, I have this like document that shows like you're pouring toxins into the ocean, and so I actually just want to get you. On the phone to talk to me so I can ask you tough questions. But I think like, yeah, leading with like, hey, I just want to know about you, and like, I'm interested in this project that you seem to be really passionate about. I just want to know more about it. We want to profile it. I think often sometimes if you play off people's egos a little bit, they'll be more likely to speak with you. At least that's been my experience.
That's awesome. And yeah, and Matt, what do you think about sort of also like the jobs? Like if your ask is really just, I'm trying to find someone who, who's found a new job in this, new program, kind of maybe like asking them for someone else, like who, then if not you, then who kind of thing. Nsikan, does that work for you?
Yeah, I like that approach too. I think that's the other thing about maybe like focusing on one of the topic areas that they're working on is like, sometimes if you reach out to somebody and you're like, hey, I just want to hear more about the Oakland County climate campaign, they'll be like, oh, like, I don't really know what this is about, and so they won't respond. But if you're like, oh, I want to know about your jobs initiatives, what are you doing in terms of windmills, or what are you doing in terms of, wind turbines, I should say. Then they'll be like, oh yeah, like, I can talk about that for like 10 minutes. So I think sometimes if you slice things off and just focus on like one slice, they'll, they can sometimes people can be a little more willing to talk.
Right. What do you think, Matt? Do you have thoughts on like next steps?
Yeah, I like the idea of trying to focus on one thing. One thing our group has talked about was it says that they were hoping to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and we kind of hear that a lot. It's like we're gonna go net zero, we're gonna go carbon free, but we want to know like what you're doing to do that. Like, so I think we're kind of focusing on the more of the policy than the jobs aspect, but
Sure.
I think focusing in on one thing is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, or yeah, if you're coming from the angle of the energy transition, I think there are ways to sort of approach like specific slices of that too, right? So you could say, okay, you want us to be carbon neutral by 2050, like how far away are we from that in terms of, the number of electric vehicles on the road, or how close are we in terms of the number of houses that are powered by renewable energy, sort of like it's really like, drilling down to like some nuts and bolts. Like it could be like your story is just about the carbon zero transition for houses, or it could be about the carbon zero transition for electric cars. Like what initiatives are they putting in place to incentivize people to purchase electric cars versus gas guzzlers? We actually just did a story about that in New York City, and I was like shocked by how few electric cars are on the road in New York City. But at the same time, there's been like a huge there's been a huge uptick in the past like 2 years because of the pandemic. But there's just a long way to go in terms of that. And part of that story also looked at, okay, how many charging stations do we even have around the city, and where are they, and which neighborhoods have the most? Because there's kind of a chicken egg thing with electric cars, where it's like people are like, well, I'm not going to buy one if I can't charge it, or if I can only charge it at home. But then people are like not building charging stations because they're like, there are not enough electric cars on the road. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to kind of to approach it. I mean, maybe asking them something specific about electric cars or about electrifying houses, that might be a way to kind of narrow things down, and then you can talk about their specific plans for doing those things.
Oh, really good advice. So we're coming to the end of this hour, which has been amazing, Nsikan. Thank you so much. Tell everyone where they can follow you on social media. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you should, look out for stuff on WNYC, also Gothamist. Gothamist is the digital arm of our production. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at MON Science. That's pretty much the only social media that I engage with these days. I do have a TikTok, but I don't really produce anything on it. Mainly just there to watch voiceovers because they're really funny. But yeah, that's it. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. If you see me yelling at people about misinformation around COVID-19, feel free to mute. You might also see some stuff on like Liverpool Football Club, which is like a team.
Well, we are super excited to see, Matt, your story, and Zion. These are going to be great. And I hope that this session has helped. Nsikan, for other student journalists and educators who might watch this recording, what advice do you give them for telling why they should tell science stories, science-related stories, and like what kind of words, of inspiration do you have for them?
Yeah, great question. I got into science because I think understanding how the universe works is a great way to be less afraid. I think having my infectious disease background really helped me when COVID-19 started to emerge, for me to really like break down, like, okay, here's what's happening in the body. Okay, here's what's happening with the airborne spread. Here are places where it's risky and where it's not risky. And I think like even today, just having that body of knowledge like kicking around my brain it provides like a tremendous amount of relief, just like walking around the street. I think it's the same thing with climate change. I've had the privilege to learn a ton about how our atmosphere works, how our oceans work. And, I think as immense as the climate change issue is, I believe that, it's not going to be the end of us. I think we are going to find ways to adapt. I think we are going to find ways to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels and the production of carbon emissions. I think there's been tremendous progress in shifting mentalities around that issue. If you look at where we were in the 2000s, and maybe your teachers can show you a documentary called The Inconvenient Truth, and reactions to that then, and where we kind of are now in terms of climate action. I think there's a long way to go. But yeah, I'm hopeful for the future, despite how bleak things can look in the present.
That's awesome. And yeah, I mean, and people are going to know about it and hear about it through the stories that we're all telling. So thank you again, Nsikan and Zion and Matt, for sharing, and everyone for coming, and have a good evening.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Later.